Exactly.
So yeah, so it's very nice. This is the first time I've done a Malternatives tasting of our products, which is interesting. And it's straight away we're into a world where I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable about these products as I am about whiskey, or as confident as I am about whiskey. But I love these spirits, and I think that I still feel like I'm able to select and pick, I hope, nice examples of them. And I still have quite definite preferences when it comes to styles, profiles. It tends to be that I would always opt for less sugar, a drier style, more distillate driven, exactly the same kind of profile that I look for in whiskey a lot of the time. So something where you're getting character from either a distillery or a region. And I think with rums and French spirits, the big difference is that there does seem to be a lot more about kind of national style and regional style, and it's certainly in France, quite deep ideas about terroir that go along with these spirits in a way that's not necessarily the case, I think, with Scotch whiskey. Some people might argue differently.
Yeah, well, we should. Yeah, well, just do the basic intro, because I'm sure everyone, including myself, is like super keen to crack into them and to get liquor on lips. But yeah, I think we've got most of the team here, most of the guys. Welcome. Thank you for joining. We are very excited about this because obviously we talk about whiskey all the time. And so it's nice to do alternatives. If you've got enough glasses for all of the, I was going to say whiskeys. If you've got enough glasses for all of the not whiskeys, please pour them out. They are single casks, so a bit of air probably wouldn't be too bad. Obviously, don't drive. Please don't drive. And yeah, I think it's probably, please add tasting notes into the chat, because obviously I can't taste most of these things, so I am going off of you guys. I trust you. I have my faith in you. And if you have any questions as well, pop them in the chat, or maybe Ollie, depending on how it goes, raise your hand, because it's a bit of a smaller group. But that's about it from me. I'd love to hand over to Angus to talk us through the first one or maybe two side by side, the Cognac and the Armagnac.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to start with the two French spirits, the Cognac, the Armagnac, and to do these adjacent. So the theme of these labels as well is sort of very much trying to represent in a way the way that French people and I think people around the world that get into it tend to visualize and think about the differences between Armagnac and Cognac. And essentially, Cognac is the refined spirit. It's the one that's more about finesse, elegance, subtlety, and Armagnac is the sort of traditionally is like peasantries. It's a rustic and more hearty and more simple spirit. And I think these two examples play with that idea a little bit. So I've tried to illustrate that on the labels by having a couple of like old vintage French stereotypes. That France is still one of the nations you can take the piss out of and make lots of stereotypical jokes about, which is fantastic. So every opportunity, I never miss it. But so with the labels, we tried to express that idea of the basic characters of Cognac, Armagnac, but I think the liquids in this instance play with that idea a little bit. So with the Cognac, you've got a 1972 single cask at cask strength, about 50.2% natural cask strength. And with the Armagnac, you've got a blend of two different casks, two casks of 1972. So same vintage, same production year as the Cognac. But this is Baz Armagnac. It came from a distillery called Chateau de Gaube in Armagnac in that region. And then this is also bottled at cask strength. So I think it's 42.9 is the natural cask strength on this. And it was just an equal mix of spirit from the two different single casks. The reason we did that is because I wanted to make sure that, because I know other people can buy these stocks, so I wanted to make sure that our mix, our blend was something unique to us. So I think with these two, it's probably wise to just nose them side by side, and because so much about these spirits is about aroma. And I think the reason that Armagnac can be difficult for people is that you really have to kind of commit and want to get into it, and you have to really have something that hooks you in. With whiskey, it's so obvious what the differences are, you know, even to an untrained or inexperienced palate. If you give someone a glass of Abelard Buna and then an Ardbeg 10-year-old, they'll go, oh yeah, these are different. There's peat, there's sherry, there's plain bourbon, there's lots of different shades that are very distinctive and very obvious. Whereas with Armagnac or Cognac, it's really about nuance and subtlety and detail, and it's the sort of thing that you only start to really recognize once you've really made an effort to taste quite a lot of them, or you've spent a lot of time comparing different versions. So, you know, the idea that there's a style of Grand Champagne Cognac versus that, you know, Petit Champagne Cognac, and they're distinct from the two, is something that's quite hard to grasp, and something that I think a lot of people, even experienced tasters, would trip up over unless they really know their stuff. So I think with here, the Armagnac to me is probably a bit more easy and accessible straight away. It's very honeyed, it's very floral, it's very scented, and it's at this naturally low cask strength where it seems to just accentuated all these kind of honeysuckle and it's like soft wormwood aromas, and just really a style that brings to mind, for me, older Speyside whiskies, things like Grande or Capradonic or Strathisla from the same kinds of vintages, where it's all really much about honeys and fruits and pollens and these kinds of profiles. Whereas if you go to the Grand Champagne Cognac, it's a bigger style, and it's also perhaps a more challenging style. It's, I think, more about wood spice. The higher alcohol brings more power, and I think it's something which, when you think about this idea of Armagnac is rustic, Cognac is elegant, I actually think the Armagnac here is slightly on the more elegant side, whereas the Cognac is slightly more on the more rustic and punchy and powerful side, which good Grand Champagne Cognac can often do. The thing we need to remember is that this is still young for a Grand Champagne Cognac. Many Grand Champagne Cognacs, really great ones, you speak to serious guys in Cognac who know about these things, and they'll often say, well, really good Grand Champagne needs minimum 60 years in cask to become really good, or to become sort of, you know, a true expression of itself. So that's another thing that fascinates me about these spirits, is just the length of time that they are often able to exist for and develop for. And, you know, you can go to Cognac, and if you have the right connections, visit the right cellars, you can try 100-year-old Cognac still in cask. And that's just insane and absolutely amazing when you think about it. And it's why whiskey is kind of, it's quite funny when you see all these, you know, new records coming for oldest whiskey ever bottled, 80 years, 81 years. It's like, well, they've been doing that in France for centuries. So yeah. What's everyone's reaction so far, just nosing 1 and 2, or tasting as well? What do you think?
Well, Owen sees the Cappadonic comparison, the grape equivalent of that honeyed malt. Yeah, it's like it sounds so terrible of me, but I often find American grape lollies. So if you've ever tried like grape Fanta, and there's like totally not grape, but weird grape kind of flavors that are astringent in a sweet way. I always find that on Armagnac in particular. I feel like people who start out with whiskey first and then go into Armagnac Cognac tend to prefer Armagnac. Is that something you find? Because I know that I will always reach for an Armagnac. Cognac.
I think Armagnac is a very clever, like, sort of sleeper spirit at the moment, that's starting to get a lot of attention. But and I think some of that's coming from whiskey guys. But what I've noticed is there's a lot more rum people starting to pay attention to Armagnac. Because another thing, especially about Armagnac, even more than Cognac, is it is actually quite a warm climate. Certainly compared to Scotch whiskey, it's a warmer maturation climate, and you have these big like Gascony oak drums and almost like cognac drums, cognac butts, big 400-liter casks. These things can and they use them for a long time, so you can really get this kind of very interesting hot climate effect where you have relatively big, chunky, but not overly active casks in a warmer climate for several decades. You start to create this profile in some Armagnacs where you really understand why rum drinkers would go for it, because you're starting to get some really elegant hot climate characteristics, like this kind of funky, gluey, estery fruit character. It doesn't necessarily show in this Armagnac, because this Armagnac matured in a more like humid, temperate cellar. So it wasn't one where you had this as much of this hot climate character, and you see that from the strength, which has declined in the way that you would expect with like an old Scotch whiskey, for example, which is why I think in some ways the fruit characteristics present more like you would find in a very old Speyside malt. Whereas some Armagnacs, where you still have quite high volume and after 30, 40 years, and if they're quite dark ones, that's when you know you're really starting to get towards a character which appeals to certain rum palates. Certainly people that would enjoy, for example, the Enmore we're going to have later on, the 1992. This sort of characteristic is something that I think rum drinkers are starting to discover in Armagnac quite a lot. And I hear that reported through, I was speaking to some guys from the RumX platform the other day, and they were really talking about how they noticed this more and more in the community there. So there is a lot of cross-pollination. I certainly hope there would be more people coming from whiskey into Armagnac and Cognac, just because I would really like to be able to sell more of them so I can do more bottlings, because I've got great supply opportunities around Cognac and Armagnac, but increasingly difficult supply around whiskey and also rum. So honestly, if I could just sell loads of Cognac and Armagnac, that would make my life so much easier, and I'd just do that because it's delicious and it's also very fun. And the like, so when I go to say Signatory, if I want to buy a cask from Signatory of Scotch whiskey, then I have to kind of pretty much just work within their preferences, like operationally of how they do things, which really minimizes what I'm able to do in terms of what I like to do, which is make potions and blend things and mess about and create funky little unusual bottlings that wouldn't and sometimes arguably shouldn't otherwise exist. But Signatory have a rule which is no faff. So they will mix two casks together at point of bottling, but they won't do things like marry or let me take a small amount of this cask and a slightly bigger amount of that cask. But if you speak to the guys in Cognac, they just say, oh, sure, no problem. We just do a small macro bottling, no problem. So there's a lot more creative scope for blending, and that's the whole culture in Cognac in particular is blending and QVs and multi-vintages and all that lovely stuff that I really like to do. And you see this in our latest Cognac bottling, Petit Champagne CognacSponge 7. This is a big multi-vintage like QV, which is basically Petit Champagnes from 1988, 1975, 73, 71, and 69, all blended together to create what I think is a really nice kind of quite layered, complex fusion style Petit Champagne cognac. And it's I just love doing shit like that. Basically, I'm not really doing this to make money. I just want to be able to make potions.
And guess we've had quite a bit of success reaching out to whiskey drinkers going, would you like some aged spirit that is affordable from the French? So, you know, forgive them and at a really good price. And if especially sweet tooths and people are like, what do you mean? And, you know, you convince them, definitely recommend this bottle, and they try it. And then like, holy crap, what is this? And then you open a whole new world for people and their eyes open and in their palates and everything. They're like, well, yeah, it's down the rabbit hole you go. And I feel like it's a perfect sort of crossover gateway. But people definitely need to kind of try it first. Otherwise, yeah, they're very much, I'm in my camp. I'm not comfortable leaving it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's about education, and it's a slow, plodding, methodical, quite difficult process. And it goes back to this thing I said before about the whiskey drinker is used to obvious, pronounced, distinctive separation between, from glass to glass. If you do a tasting and you just pick 6 new expressions from 6 different distilleries, you can really have fun seeing the differences and recognizing the differences. And the thing that you can do in whiskey, which is very occasionally if someone gives you a glass of something blind and you get almost right what it is, like, yeah, fucking I'm an expert, yes, great. And you can't do that in Armagnac and Cognac. I mean, there might be some people that can do it, some super tasters that have dedicated their lives to these spirits, but I certainly couldn't do it. And the similarity and you really like sitting there with a sort of an organoleptic microscope looking at all these spirits, trying to discern subtle differences and nuances. And it's all about nuance and detail. And that requires a certain level of, I think, acceptance and understanding and education, not in a snobbish or elitist way, just in a sort of a humility way. Like, you recognize that this is what this world is about, and you've got to be enchanted by that reality, and you want to get sort of sucked in and involved and interested. For me, I suppose when I'm tasting whiskies, I'm looking for something from a distillery that, most of them I know roughly what to expect or what the character often is. So I'm looking for something to surprise me within that expectation. Whereas with Cognac, Armagnac, I just know how good they can be. And I'm just sort of looking for what the sample that hits that sweet spot and checks that sort of, it crosses that threshold in my mind of, okay, we're in that world where it's all honeys and fruits and peaches and nectar and tobaccos and rancio. That's where I want to be. So yeah, there's lots of pleasure to be had from Armagnac Cognac. I think there's lots of similarities if you like these softer styles of slightly older single malt whiskies. And there's certainly lots to be found in, I think, rum and Armagnac in particular, if you like rum. But they're also quite distinctive and of themselves, and and they're worth exploring with a totally open mind. And even young ones. We've only bottled old ones so far. We should really bottle, and I'm waiting on some samples to bottle some much younger and considerably more affordable cognacs, because they can be so beautiful. They're just so fresh, and we're looking at some cask samples right now. I've got one here from the Ile d'Orléans on the coast of Bordeaux, and it's a tiny island. And honestly, this is a 10-year-old cask strength cognac, and it has coastal, like, salty notes. I suppose it would be like Bordeaux's Tasmania, potentially, if that makes sense. I don't know, but the
Isle of France.
Yeah, the Isle of France. Yeah, except so it has really, it has really distinctive, beautiful characteristics, which remind me of like Clynelish almost. And that's the sort of thing I'm really hoping to do more bottlings of. So then it becomes even more accessible, because you're paying a sub £100 for a bottle of like really beautiful, charismatic spirit, and you're finding a new angle on it. So that's something I think we'll do soon. And later this year we've got CognacSponge number 8, I want to say, 8, and that's going to be 1988 Framboise from Valentesinier. So a new producer that we're working with, and they're a very serious house. So this is like the equivalent of working with a distillery directly, as opposed to working with a broker or a merchant. Like in Scotch whisky would be the distinction of working with Signatory versus going to like Ardent American to get a cask directly. So I'm really excited for that, and the Cognac's beautiful. So Cognac's winning by a hair by the look of it so far.
I just ran a quick poll because I feel like the rums are our palates won't remember these two, and I just wanted to see what the feedback was, which is exciting to see. Everyone is midway.
It's nice to see that there's still quite an equitable split between the two. someone's saying they're definitely in the Armagnac camp. Armagnac's more elegant on the nose. Yeah, I tend to agree. I certainly think Armagnac is probably the best value spirit in terms of aged spirits out there, in terms of what you get, in terms of the distinctiveness of the production and the maturation. Cognac they've both got incredible things about them, like Cognac's pot still distilled, whereas Armagnac's column, and that creates quite separate, styles. And Armagnac just generally being more rugged and maturing in a slightly warmer part of France. All these sorts of things add up to something quite remarkable with Armagnac. We've saved the rest of this Armagnac. So I think there's one cask left, which was maybe been topped up with some of the leftovers of this bottling, but it turns 50 in April, and so it's still maturing in Groupe Run cellars. So we've secured the rest of it for a 50-year-old Armagnac. Not sure what we'll do with that yet, but maybe a notable age statements bottling.
Yeah, fair enough. It's I completely agree with what you're saying on just like the accessibility of them. Like my friend was turning 40 and he loves whiskey, and I'm like, there's no way I love you enough to even attempt to search it. And I got him a bottle of, I think it was like 40-year-old Armagnac for like $160 Australian. It was bonkers affordable. And I think that I find that Cognac as well is starting to err into the more expensive, because you got houses like Hennessy and Remy Martin and whatnot who are like, look at our King Louis, and it's like, why would I buy this when I could buy a single cask? But
the thing about that is that, so I totally agree that the big houses, you've got essentially in Cognac, you've got the big four: you Martel, Hennessy, and Hein, and what's the other one? Bloody hell, that's terrible. I should remember that. Anyway, you've got four big houses that essentially carve up over 90% of the market between them. Courvoisier, and they're vast behemoths, and they essentially exist to sell bling. They put out some beautiful products, but a lot of the stuff they put out is like overpriced rappers bling, and like
it's costume jewelry rather than actual jewelry.
And all these silly Remy Martin decanters and everything, blah blah blah. Yeah, 100% very silly, but that architecture allows for quite a lot of gems to slip through these cracks. You've got these four big, like chunks, and within that world of small growers producing and feeding these large houses, either selling fruit or distilling themselves and selling the spirit, it creates this ecosystem and culture where people are keeping little bits for themselves. And then these families, what tends to happen in France and Cognac is these families keep aging and have children, and then people die and they fall out and they argue, and then they've got these casks, they're like got 10 butts of 50, 60-year-old stunning homemade Cognac sitting in a cellar somewhere, and they're all squabbling over it and fighting over it, and it's sitting there maturing, getting better and better, and eventually some lawyers get involved and more people die, and then eventually my colleague and my friend Guillaume Grosperin goes along and just buys everything for a really good price. And so the few brokers that are operating like that, working in this world, building relationships, working with families, buying these little leftovers that people make for themselves, this is the gems, the diamonds. And because of the big four that sort of sit on top of everything like a blob, it enables these smaller players to just go about their business and do this stuff. If you had the same sudden, massive interest upswing in French spirits that you had in whiskey, say from the 90s towards today, then you would very quickly start to see this world sort of change in much in the same way that that whiskey has changed. Like going to visit Grosperin to select casks, or to taste casks even, and just talk and try things, is probably like what it was going to visit, I don't know, Gordon and MacPhail in the 1980s, if you can imagine such a thing. It's the Cognac equivalent of that, and that's how different the worlds are, and how much they could change if everyone that's presently obsessing about Scotch whiskey and buying it and if that just overnight they switched to cognac, it would everything would change in a heartbeat for sure. So there's still lots of good cognac out there, good price cognac. I think Armagnac is slightly better value, but there is still, if you know which houses to look for and go to, then I think about it in relation to Scotch whiskey. So our Grand Champagne 1972 is on the expensive side, but it's 285 quid a bottle in the UK. But what would a 1972 single cask, single malt, cask strength cost you now at sort of 49-ish years of age? So Kinder's just released a blended malt 1971 the other day for his 50th anniversary, whatever thing. And that's a blended malt, and that's £1,250 a bottle, and I've got a sample and it's fine, but our cognac's better. So, that's
good to know. No need to spend your house deposit.
These are absolutely, yeah. That's the thing. It's fucking house deposits now. It's so silly. And I make a distinction between these sorts of things, and I still make it. I have to make that distinction when we're bottling things, because we often bottle stuff where, yeah, I can't always afford to buy these things myself, but I know there's a market for them, and you're just trying to make sure that you feel you've got that equilibrium right between really good quality. If the quality's there, then, and the price is okay, it's on the high side, but you understand, that's where it's just got to be. Unfortunately, yeah. Most independent bottlers would love everything to be cheaper, because it would just make doing business much more comfortable and much more reliable. The pricing thing doesn't help anybody except people that own casks. Anyway, shall we try the rums?
Well, yeah. So the next two that I was going to say whiskies again. I need to stop myself. The next two. Did we want to try the two Barbados rums side by side? Are they?
Yeah, I think we can do the two Barbados side by side.
Yeah, the 21 and the 22.
Yeah, so I'm just going to remind myself about these bottles actually, because yeah. So Angus, these were, yeah.
For us who are kind of new to rum, do you mind giving us a 30-second explanation how rum is made?
Yeah, so rum, I mean, at the top level, it's very simple in that it's either cane sugar juice, which is pressed, fermented, and then distilled to create a spirit, or it's sugar molasses, which is distilled, it's fermented, distilled to make a spirit. Rum nerds tend to prefer pure cane juice. They tend to prefer pot distillation because it can be distilled through a pot still or a column still. And they tend to prefer the spirit to be mature. On balance, I think people tend to prefer, and they pay more for, the spirits which are matured in tropical climates as opposed to what's termed continental climates, which would be Europe and the UK. Within that, though, there is a world of nuance and difference coming around things, particularly around fermentation. The world of fermentation in rum is fascinating, especially if you go to places like Jamaica, where they're getting into dunder pits. And I mean, if you've ever seen, just Google image search the fermentation room at Hamden Distillery in Jamaica. This is like,
I'll get it up on screen.
It's huge. It's like I don't know how to describe it, but I don't know. It's like probably a scene from the film Event Horizon where Sam Neill goes into hell at the end. It's like that kind of dark, mushy pit of doom and goo. I don't know, something from like, I'm trying to think of other film references. Anyway, Google image search it. You'll see what I'm talking about. That's a good example of a very extreme and very distinctive, very individualistic approach in rum, just using decision-making and techniques in fermentation, so these things are never cleaned. Like you talk about in Scotch whiskey where they're obsessively steaming their washbacks, and they are like really trying to keep everything meticulously clean between fermentations. These guys rely on this pocket universe of bacteria and culture that exists in this room to create character, and they control the different marks, which is different levels of ester in their rums, these chemical compounds, called esters, which essentially deliver varying degrees of fruit characteristic. So a combination of different yeast recipes and different additions of dunder, which is this sort of biological muck pit that is like a sort of sourdough starter, which is continually topped up and stuff. And then this is used to control things like the level of esters and the amount of bacteria that have activity in the fermentation. And then that recipe is then distilled and creates a certain mark, a certain type of rum, which is aged separately. And then these things are used as blending components. This is where rum starts to become insanely complicated, and my knowledge, we reach pretty much the limit of it. There are people out there who have privately guarded lists of all the different marks, the codes of different rums from different distilleries, and I've only just started being able to get this information from the people that we buy rum casks from. And every time we release a rum bottle, inevitably get the same Facebook messages through Decadent Drinks or to me personally, whatever, people saying, yeah, but what's the mark? How long was it aged here for? And like, sometimes I just don't know. And recently I said, oh, I do know this one. It's this one, MP, blah, 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 whatever. And they said, don't you mean MX? Blah, blah? Well, maybe, I don't know. I'm just telling you what's written on a fucking sheet. I don't know. So
I literally had a conversation 20 minutes ago about your Long Pond release, and someone less than half an hour ago said, I've just bought that release. Do you know which mark Angus chose for this bottling?
Is that Thomas?
Yeah.
Thomas messaged me asking to ask Angus tonight, what is the mark?
Right. So I love the idea that I'm this, rum savant, just nosing hundreds of cask samples. I will detect this mark for this release, I think. No, that's not what happened. We got sent some cask samples, and I went, like, here's one, the Clarendon 2004. Oh, that's good. Yeah, let's have that. I'm afraid that is the limit of my artistry. Not necessarily. There is some blending that goes on with rum, and we're starting to do, and we have done some, I think, like the best rums we've done, in my view, tend to be the ones where we tinker with blending in the same way that with whiskey and small batch multi-vintage bottlings is something that I love and I think works well, and it certainly works with rum. So that Long Pond in specific is exactly the one I was talking about, where I got questions. So the sheet I've got, and I only got this sheet after I did the fucking label, so there's something on the label which is wrong, which really annoyed me, but don't tell anyone. So the Long Pond, we'll get to these things in a minute. So MJC is the mark I have on my sheet. Now, that was the one where someone messaged back and said, are you sure MJC? No, it must be something else. And I said, well, I can read, that's all it says, but you need to take it up with.
Did that come from Sheer in the Netherlands?
This came from Main Rum in Liverpool.
Oh, interesting.
And this is one where so we had to fight tooth and claw to get this information. So MJC, and distilled in Jamaica in 2004, aged for 13 years in Jamaica, shipped to the UK for a remainder of its maturation. So that's one where I think I put on the label early landed and didn't reference the 13 years tropical maturation, but I would have done. And now I'm starting to be able to give this information in more detail. So we talked a bit about Jamaica and stuff there, because Jamaica is quite an extreme example, and it's the country I think most people go to for things like, different ester levels, marks, and it's a good illustration of just where the detail lies in rum. So the basic bedrock of how it's made, the principles of its making, production, and its recipe as a drink are quite simple. The vast majority of rum in this world is, in my view, hyper sugared, unregulated shit. And, it's this sort of claggy, gum sticking hell juice that is clogging up supermarket shelves the world over. That's fine, I suppose, because a lot of people just want to make cocktails. But although I think a good rum, we had some cocktails recently with our Clarendon from Jamaica. It was fucking fantastic. So I think always use good ingredients, would be my view. But
yes, you mentioned your multi-vintages. So we're huge into sort of big high ester Hamdens and Long Ponds and kind of anything pot distilled that's been gluey and more like a inner tube, the better, right?
Yeah.
And I still use we call it
RumSponge 6.
Yeah, the man swimming around in the pool as a benchmark.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite RumSponge we've done. Is essentially a 1990 and a 1992 Hamden mixed together at cask strength. That was one where even very experienced rum, I would say experts, like my friend Billy Abbott, who works for the Whiskey Exchange, I gave him that, and even he had to have a sit down and just say, there's no blue cheese in the world that smells more of blue cheese than this rum. So that is like the ultimate extreme example. And that one I specifically liked because it was predominantly continental maturation. So I think that really long, slow stew of all those like high ester, trebly, funky characteristics that you mentioned. Yeah, I think it really worked. And yeah, I love that rum. And we're doing something else very similar soon.
Owen's talking about my bottle, and it is truly fantastic. It's probably a signature bottling of any brown spirit, to be honest. So, and that was from memory, that was a blended to Cask, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was 1990 and 1992, both recycled rum barrels. And I don't know so that was one of these ones where all we were getting was the Cask info sheet saying JMH, which is not a mark that Hamden formally do. It's just, I think, a name applied by Main Rum and Shear to denote that this originated from Hamden. Yeah. So we know it's Hamden. I don't know the specific mark, but it was high ester. You could tell this stuff was like.
That's funny. I found a review that said that it was a C Diamond H mixed with a L Rock, so 400 ester and a 1200 ester, based on the
So it's entirely possible that there are people who have better contacts in Main Rum and are in rum. This is what I mean. There are rum fanatics out there. So the very fact we are having this conversation now should be a good illustration of just how detailed and wonderfully nerdy the rum world is. I'm sure there are rum enthusiasts out there who are buying our bottles who know more about what's gone into our bottles than I do, because they have better contacts in the very murky world of rum to find out, say, like they can probably go to these companies and say, what did you sell to that company that went into that bottling? And like, that's the level, that's what I'm competing with. Yeah. When people ask me questions, I don't know the answer to.
It was also
we should have got Owen to host this. I mean, at this point, it's turned into the Phillips show.
91 or 92 or whatever it was, because obviously a C Diamond H mark, this 1200 ester, you've got to do, wild ferments, you've got to do dund, you've got to do muck, and you've got to ferment it sometimes for up to 2 months. So there was this conversation that for most of that year, they produced that mark, and that, so any of these vintages that were over in Europe were predominantly that, especially if you detected high esters. So I think it was a combination of knowing Hamden's production schedule, having that Main Rum connection, and then actually tasting the bottle at the end. It's funny that I'd read a review that mentioned your mark. So I was going to go, Angus, you're a madman taking this huge ester and this sort of medium ester. And how did you decide on that? And I guess it was just
so I would love to say that I knew all the information about the esters and made a very clever decision. But the decision was not based around, it was still an element of, I suppose, like, I don't know if creativity is the right word, but there was a professional decision-making process on my part where I had the cask samples and I was very close to doing them separately as single casks, and I spent a lot of time with them, but just blending them, once I got the regauges and able to do a blend in the proportions of, the ratio proportion of what they would be, do a small version of that. And I sat with that for about a month, just seeing how it developed. And I thought that's the best way to do these two casks, is that they both have something. It's like the same story with our Glenkeith small batch multi-vintage thing we did, where it was a 91 and 92, 91, 93. Each cask had something that the other cask could have done with a bit more of. So mixing them together created something greater than the sum of its parts. And that was the same approach with the Hamden. I thought this creates what I feel is a better single product. And I think it also gives a more full picture of what I enjoy and what I think about when I think of Hamden. So that was the thought process that went into that. As time goes on, I'm learning more and more about all these marks and all that, you know, and having better connections to get the proper information about maturation profiles and all these things. So there's more of that information will start to work its way through to labels and product descriptions and how we communicate about our products. But this is what I mean. Rum so far for us has very much been done on instinct and judgment. I feel like I'm a good judge of quality, and I think that I try to apply that to rum. I'm also aware enough of what's popular in the rum community that, and it tends to be, I think my tastes align with that. So I hope that what we put out is going to be popular with the, you know, the broad swathe of people that are serious about rum. And almost all of them, by the way, who know more than I do, has been demonstrated by Owain there. So should we talk about the Barbados?
Maybe we should talk a little bit about the Barbados. I feel like
sorry,
Owen's
yeah,
already
these
finished his
two Barbados, yeah, they're both from Foursquare. So we don't use Foursquare on the front label, but we put it on the rear label. They're two sibling casks from the same batch. The second one, obviously, a year apart, year older. And I don't think it's even a year older, but went a bit further. I think they're both really nice examples of rums where you had a little bit of hot climate maturation at the start, about 3 years before being moved to the UK. They're pot distilled, and you have you have naturally low cask strengths on both of these. So they're both full matured in barrels, once used ex-bourbon barrels, and you have 49% natural cask strength on edition 14 and 47.6 natural cask strength on edition 18. Something I find with rum is that so many of them are very high strength, and this can be quite brutal. So my palate, my preference is often for pleasure in spirits. And that's why, as I've talked before in many of these tastings where we use targeted reduction, and specifically for a lot of our rums, like our Long Pond we just did, brought that down to 60%. I've got a Clarendon 2004 here that's sitting at 66.7. We'll probably bring that down to 63 or 60, just so that it still retains power, which I think rum people really do enjoy. They like the power of rum, but I think that just rounding it out helps bring complexity and often helps accentuate the esters and the fruit components, which to me, that's what I'm looking for in rums, is I want complex esters and I want fruit flavor. But with these, this is a really nice example where you didn't need to do any of that. They were just naturally sitting at a perfectly accessible strength. And I think this particular, I think this is a good question. I think it's all pot on these. These are two of the ones. This is just before we were getting better information. So as far as I understand it, all pot, but if you think it tastes otherwise, tell me, and I will go and try and find out more information.
Just Richard's really secretive about whether or not he does everything all pot, you see, because you just see pot column blend, and you're like, did you blend that at birth, or did you blend pot in a column cast? I was requesting, so my business partner Ian deals with buying the rums, and I was asking him, he asked me, you know, what are you looking for? What do you like on this list? And I was saying specifically, can you get pot distilled things? So it's entirely probable and possible that it's pot column blend, but as I understood it, and it may just be you know, wires crossed, that this is these were all pot. However, I will try and find out. I won't say further and commit one way or the other, because I genuinely don't know 100%. I understood it that they were all pot, but it could be that we've got our messages wrong on that one. So,
I'm curious to see
what I like
which
about
one people prefer, actually, just in the comments.
What I was going to broadly say, the style of these rums I would just describe as being, they have some funkiness, but I like the medicinal aspect, and I like that so that you get medicines, breads, funk, and fruit in a way which is very balanced and very harmonious. And that's what I like particularly about Foursquare and that sort of Barbados style. And I think these are two very nice examples where you get maturity, you get balance, roundedness. They behave in some ways like, I think, a really good, charismatic Highland malt like Clynelish would behave at 21 years in a refill hogshead. It's that kind of equivalent in the rum world. So that's what I find attractive about these particular single casks.
Yeah, cool.
Angus, sorry, Angus, can you talk us a little bit through the early landed versus tropical aging and some of the characteristics you think each provide on the rum?
Well, tropical aging is just essentially hot climate and different levels of humidity, and that creates a very concentrated style. I mean, I suppose the way that it's often pitched, and I don't know how much people agree with this, who know more than I do about rum, but the pitch is that it's 5 years. Sort of continental aging is equivalent to 1 year tropical aging. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that, because I think it's just, I don't think it's a useful way to think about it, because it's just a different environment. So 5 years in hot climate is not going to deliver the exact same profile if it was 25 years in continental climate. It's just not, because you're getting things like a much higher rate or faster rate of extraction from the wood, and you're just getting a totally different chemical interplay in that environment between cask and spirit and air. So you tend to get more concentration of ester. You tend to get a much more powerful gluey characteristic. I think this sort of glue character that you find in some rums, this sort of really intense, like bicycle inner tube, sort of hyper funky style, that tends to be really magnified by warmer climate. And also the alcohol goes up because you're losing water faster than you're losing, or non-alcoholic liquid faster than you're losing alcohol. So so that's very much I think the key difference. And I think that rum guys tend to be more attracted to hot climate stuff because there's fewer of them. It's rarer. Obviously, it's more expensive. It depletes volume much faster. So when you get something that spent 20 years in tropical climate maturation, you've got a really charismatic, intense, powerful, sometimes divisive style of rum, but one that has extremely devoted followers. So we're just about to release Clarendon 1997, which has had 22 years tropical maturation, and it's extreme. I just opened a bottle the other day and tried it. It's insane and really, really great. And we've also used a part of that cask to blend with another rum and create our very first RumSponge special edition, which is going to come out in April. I think April. So that's a very limited small batch thing, which I'll tell you about. So it's a 97 Clarendon mixed with a 97 Caroni, both of which had over 20 years tropical maturation. And I did this just because I thought, sort of messing about at home, and I just thought there's a lot of similarities between these two that is coming very obviously from the hot climate component of their DNA. So I thought just doing a little 50-50 mix, I just sat that in a sample bottle and let's see how that sits together. I just thought this is so good. So let's do one. Let's do a small fun bottling. So we've used the really nice cognac glass we used for our Glengrant 73, and we've made, I think, a really beautiful, there's only 95 bottles. So yeah, it's quite a special bottling, that one.
Well, Angus, I know that we have to be very conscious of time because you've got to start your meetings.
It's all right. Actually, I've got no, it's okay. I've got time. Honestly, I don't mind. I know I said an hour, but it's okay.
The rum spiral that we've gotten into is
I knew this would happen. I knew this would happen about rum, and I'm properly out of my comfort zone when it comes to rum. So forgive me if I trip up and make errors. It's what I mean. For me, it's a very instinctual and personal taste based process with doing rum bottlings, and I'm learning all the time, and it's fascinating, but I do have a lot more to learn.
Did you pick up Matt's new book, Modern Caribbean Rum?
No, not yet.
I
should.
That's been the absolute Bible for me, because I'm still learning hugely. But that's Mark's history, everything.
Modern Caribbean Rum.
Yeah, Matt Pietrek from Cocktail Wonk or Rum Wonk. It's kind of the sort of the Emmanuel Dron equivalent for rum, the collecting Scotch whiskey style. But it's everything you need to know about production.
Thank you for the.
Oh, and you're gonna have to share the name of that book in the chat so that everyone can buy a copy later on.
We've done so many tastings, sorry Emma, and they become quite technical whiskey, and then this tasting comes along and shits all over it in terms of this is the most nerdy thing we've ever done.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm completely out of my depth.
Like,
I'm sorry.
Same here. I mean, like, for obviously not being able to drink it, for me, I'm like, I mean, I don't worry about, the different names for the different sugars and the difference and things. I know that Hampden Estate tastes like Gorgonzola, but that's like it. So, but yeah, no. Well, shall we maybe?
Yeah, we can talk about the other ones.
The Enmore and get into something old and fun.
So the Enmore, this was another one where just through sheer internal error, we did an SMWS and accidentally labeled it as a 1990 rather than a 1992. So we had to relabel a massive bunch of this stock, which was a complete pain in the arse. But yeah, edition 15, 1992 Enmore, 29-year-old Guyanese rum. And this was just bottled single cask strength. And this is one where I really don't have a lot of information about the history of its maturation profile. But I would just say, and I'm sure that Owen and others here will probably know more than I would do on all this, but I would say that Guyana, whereas with Jamaica, you've got marks, I think with Guyana, one of the added complexities is the different stills that have been used at different distilleries and have then moved around, or have been, as distilleries have closed down, stills have moved and been consolidated into other large distilleries like Diamond. But this Enmore, so this would have been I think distilled through the old Versailles wooden pot still. Which you can see pictures of online. It's a remarkable ancient piece of kit.
So 92 was actually produced at Enmore Estate on the double. So Enmore is a double column still setup, so it's not wooden pot still.
Oh, it's not wooden. Okay, well I would have thought it was wooden pot still.
The Port Moran one, and then the Enmore was actually, so it's closed distillery rum essentially. But the stills they were at Oot Flute, and then when Oot Flute closed, they're now at Diamond.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So the stills move around. So the sort of part of the complexity is chasing down what was made in what stills at what period of time at which distillery. And so, but broadly overall, I think the character of this one is quite true to one of the sort of fuller bodied Guyanese styles, and I really like this kind of, I would describe this as much more of a very rich umami, quite bready style that's going toward, it has some of these medicinal qualities, has some of these coastal qualities, but you're also getting a lot of this kind of like salted treacle and slightly gingery, slightly like black olive tapenade kind of character. And it's quite an interesting one before going to something like the Caroni, which is also it's quite a heavy sort of profile and shares some characteristics of the Enmore in terms of I think the more like tarry, spicy medicinal qualities, but then is going off in a different direction again. And the Caroni, what I know about that is it came from a batch which had, I think a lot of these 97, 98 Caronis we see on the market were consolidated at points. So they would be matured for around 10 years in Trinidad and then consolidated, which is vatted into tanker or shipping IBCs, moved to the UK and put back into recycled rum barrels. So this kind of split maturation where you get a significant portion of tropical maturation with then an extended period of continental maturation, I think is a big part of defining the character of a lot of these Caronis that we see on the market. And there's a fair bit of similarity between them, but I think enough time has elapsed now that these casks are starting to show a bit more individual nuance. And we've got a few Caronis actually left, so some 98s and possibly a 97 or two. But again, this is the problem that it's, a lot of stuff that's happened in whiskey is sort of starting to happen in rum in terms of the prices people are asking for things and supply issues and then deciding, what do we do with this, or, where do we sell it? How do we sell it? What's the best approach? Can we sit in it for longer? I mean, if up to me, I would like to be able to sit on these stocks for considerably longer. Like I'd be really interested to see how these Caronis perform at 30 years old. If they could be left for that long in UK warehouses, then they'd be really interesting.
Are you sourcing Caronis from Maine as well, or from Signatory?
No, we bought some Caronis from Maine, and we bought others from another broker, which I'm not allowed to say who it is. But
not Gargano. Okay,
no.
I didn't think.
Don't guess. You can't say.
There's one. So there's the Enmore came from a third-party broker, which is why we have not enough info about it. The Caroni that you're tasting here came from a different third-party broker that's not Maine, and is separate from the previous parcels that we bottled, like the 97s and 98s we bottled before. They came from Maine. This one is from a small parcel we got a few of and came from another source, which just through agreements I can't say who that is, but it's a separate parcel, and I think an interesting parcel because it's still got that quite heavy characteristic we associate with these Caroni vintages, but there's I think a slightly lighter style going on, and I think it's natural cask strength. This one, they're all sitting naturally around about 60, and I know these ones had, I think, just over 10 years in Trinidad before moving to the UK, and it's got that nice harmonious balance, and they're all similar, the casks, but with their own subtle differences. So that's why I think, well, what do we do with them? Just put them all out as single casks, or is there something more interesting we can do with them? I'm trying to persuade my business partner Ian to let me have another one of his 97 Caronis so I can make a multi-vintage Caroni at the moment. Whether he agrees to do that or not, I don't know. We'll see. So yeah, that's where we are with those ones. What do people think? Do you have a preference for the two? Because I think this is a good example of, again, the quite distinctive different styles you can get in rum, and there's very clear similarities, but there's also very clear distinctions as well.
Yeah, I've always found that, like, Caroni on the nose, obviously for me on the nose, is just so much more interesting. Keenan loves the style of Caroni, and obviously he's asking about more. So I'm sure he's going to have one of those Google alert notifications anytime Ollie loves the Caroni. I'm real curious, because obviously these are all relatively old rums. Are you looking for younger single casks? I know there's some Panamanian rum distilleries that allow indie bottlings and stuff like that.
So the short answer is yes. I'm always open to anything, and I'd love to be able to find. It's a lot of the time it's the same answer as in whiskey, in the sense that I would love to bottle younger and cheaper stuff. because younger does tend to mean a bit more affordable or slightly cheaper, but it's actually harder to find that kind of stuff than it is to find stuff in the mid-age, above 3 figures sort of price point level. There's a lot more diversity there, and you're more likely to come across things that tick that kind of internal pleasure box and make me happy to bottle it and make me happy to work with it. And I'm not just going to go out and bottle any old thing just because it's younger or cheaper, because often that's a world where there's just so much crap, and it's really about sifting for gold, and you have to go through cask sample after cask sample. There's lots of people working with younger spirits and doing a very good job, but you tend to need a different infrastructure that you control yourself. You need to control your own warehouse, control bottling, have the ability to make deliberate interventions in the profile and maturation cycle of the spirits themselves, either through careful re-racking or blending in a process that you directly control, in order to add value, essentially to improve the quality, or to be able to deliver something from something different that's significant, sufficiently different to interest people commercially from what was a very large parcel of stock, which a lot of your competitors have the same casks from, or same sibling casks from the same parcel. So these are challenges that are commercial as well as quality driven, and it's something that I think people perhaps forget about. Doing indie bottling is, you kind of had to make a choice, really, and that's why we've sort of chosen to be a bit more lopsided on the older stuff, just because when you're bottling hand to mouth like we are, it's a bit easier to work in that world, I think. Over time, as our relationships around supply mature and I get more confident and I learn more, and the other thing about rum is there's many younger stuff from other countries which I just don't think is very good, and I if we bottled it, I would not have confidence that we'd be able to sell it very easily. And so I steer clear of and when I try them, a lot of these things, like I don't want to like pick on one country or anything, but many countries where you can easily go out and buy casks of sort of younger rums or column rums or whatever, and I find them quite spirituous and harsh, and I don't find them particularly attractive or accessible as sipping spirits, so I tend to steer clear of them, and I tend to just try and stick with what I know I like, what I know I would be happy to sell and talk about, and what I feel confident that the rum community likes. So that's what we try to stick to with rum. If we can develop better lasting relationships with distillers and producers directly over time, that's where I think the future lies, as with Scotch whiskey, so with rum as well. And that's what I'm just starting to try and really work on for the future these days, but it's a long and sort of evolutionary process, which I hope will yield results in time, but it will take time.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I'm very jealous of what everyone's saying about the Bakewell tart on the Enmore. I don't even recall if I've ever had a Bakewell tart, but I will need to remedy that. Molly, what is this? It's like a British sweet pie, like a fruit mince pie, but different, right? I'm not.
A Bakewell, yeah, it's like a sort of marzipan-y kind of flavor, almondy marzipan-y, with often you put cherries in it as well. So Owen, you're asking any other regions you're interested in bottling. Good question. The answer is yes, but it comes back again to this problem, which is I'm very keenly aware of, is I need to get better educated and taste more to give myself the confidence to buy more diversely. So I keep saying, my business partner Ian and I keep talking to each other about this, like, we just have to go to more rum festivals and meet more people and socialize more in that world. But we're just so fucking busy, and we've both got young families and trying to run a business. And Ian is literally insane. Like, he's started an auction empire, and then he started Decadent Drinks with me, and then he bought Royal Mile whiskies. He's an idiot. I don't know what he's doing. But he's just a business savant. So he's very, very busy. I'm extremely busy, and these things just get falling down the bottom of the pile. But it's fully my intention, as soon as I can manage it, to read more about rum and socialize more directly and like physically in the rum world. And like, I had a great time at Whiskey Live Paris last year. It was our first proper event with Decadent Drinks, and I was able to go and speak to some really interesting people in the rum world. But I didn't get a chance to taste a lot of stuff, but it was really, it's very instructive, and I just need to do more of that and improve my knowledge and improve my relationships, really. So yeah, the same answer really for what I said to Emma before.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was that?
Well,
there's some wonderful rums, even homegrown. There's some wonderful English rum, and we visited Kit at Ninefold, which is just over the road from Annandale, and he's producing some wonderful Scottish rum. And these all sound like funny terms when we've been talking about Barbados and Jamaica, but there is actually, rum is sort of being seen less of on that equivalent of gin, where people just make it to make money to make whiskey, and people are actually putting a lot of focus now into, we're a rum distillery, or we're 50% a rum distillery and 50% a whiskey distillery. There's a lot.
I've noticed that. I suppose my concern about these things is not that. I suppose first of all is quality, but there's also the factor which applies in whiskey, which is people want. So in whiskey, what people say they want and what they spend on are two different things. Everyone says they want, small batch, affordable, or I'm really interested in new flavors, or why can't we have more diversity? And like, I would be interested in a Mongolese whiskey, and then you sort of go out and source and you bottle a Mongolese whiskey, and then no fucker buys it because they're like, oh, I want Ben Nevis and Springbank. Like, yeah, of course you do. Just be honest. Tell us that's what. And so that's the aspect. There is unfortunately a commercial aspect to this, which you just have to bear in mind when doing business, which is like, we bottled some German whiskies, Sal More, and I think they're nice. I think they're good, but nobody wants to buy them. So, you end up sort of stuck with some stock. And that's what I'm really trying to learn from my, not mistakes, but decisions past, and learn from how they played out commercially as well as critically, and apply that as well as I can to decision making going forward. And that's absolutely true of rum. And I'm even less confident with rum, as you can see, certainly than with whiskey or with French spirits. So I just need to be a bit cautious. I wouldn't want to go willy-nilly bottling something, even if I really liked it, if I wasn't sure or confident in rum, the broader rum community's likely reaction to it as a product and uptake of it as a product. Because even if something gets a good review nowadays, like everything gets a good review nowadays, most people know what's good and are good at bottling decent stuff. And a lot of things get well reviewed or appreciated, but there's so much competition for people's spend. Like, people have shallower pockets than they used to. People are being much more discerning with their spending. And so you have to be very careful about what you put out as a bottler, and try to work really even harder. So these factors all come into play. But the broad point I would say about rum is 100% yes, would love to diversify. I just need to get myself into shape and educate myself better more quickly. Watch this space.
Well, I think that's kind of a good time to maybe launch the poll and see what everyone's favorite rum that you had today was. And I suppose that kind of also answers my question that you probably won't be coming out with a single cask aged tequila anytime soon. That's much more up my alley of drinking.
I'd love to. I've often said, like, the reason the company is called Decadent Drinks is specifically so it can do everything from tequila to cider. I've got dreams in my head of doing sherry sponge, apple sponge, or Éponge du Pomme for a Calvados, or
Yes.
or agave sponge and doing mezcals, tequilas. But it's just time and like relationship building, time, and that level of investment for the level of return is just unfortunately non-viable. And also, I would be cautious about getting into a world of mezcal, particularly where there's some astonishing spirits being made, but I would want to make sure that whoever we worked with got a fair deal. And I think sometimes there can be a bit of a funny thing about just buying some stuff that a Mexican farmer has made and then, charging an arm and a leg for it and laughing all the way to the bank. I would want to make sure we weren't going down that route, before jumping onto that boat. So that's, there's all sorts of considerations around these other spirits. And also it's just like, can you sell them? We may do an eau de vie this year. I'm speaking to someone about that. If we do that, what's the, how quickly we're going to sell it? It's got to be easy to do these things, and it's got to be a side project, because there's always the business consideration which gets in the way sometimes, which is annoying. That's why I said earlier, go back to what I said at the start. I'd rather not be making money. I'd rather just be making potions, and they just swap them for food. I'd be happy.
I did read somewhere, Angus, that Serge would disown you if you did a gin sponge. I think it was in one of his tasting notes of your rums.
I know, it's the one thing that's made me think, well, maybe I should do a gin sponge.
So you can get him out of your hair.
Yeah, I don't like gin, but I like a gin and tonic, but I think the gin craze is insane and stupid. But so maybe, I don't know, maybe I would do a gin sponge. Probably not. I'm too busy. I probably won't ever do a gin sponge. I don't know. We'll see.
Just a pointer to everyone on the poll as well. You can vote for 2. So if you did actually love one of the cognacs or the Armagnacs over a rum, considering the absolute rum great geek crowd that we seem to have, I'm sure that's really going to happen. But I just one quick question that Mirko asked: the German whiskey that you bottled, what whiskey was that? What distillery?
Sorry, I missed that. I was reading one of the comments. What was that again, sir?
That's all right. You mentioned that you'd bottled a German whiskey. Just which distillery was that?
So distillery Ralph Hauer, Salletmore, and it made 2 really interesting single casks. The one from peat smoked barley, and one from barley which was kilned using beechwood, German barley kilned over beechwood, and I just did them side by side as a pair. They're Whiskey Sponge editions 73 A and B, and I think that, to me, they reminded me of like young Kalila or like 8-year-old Smogen Swedish whiskey. This really sharp, pure, but quite slightly different takes on smokiness and peatiness in whiskey. And I thought they were really nice, well made. But yeah, there's an element of them which is they're expensive for young whiskey, so that's obviously a component. Huge fan of Decadent releases. Unfortunately, most are out of my very small budget. I'm trying to work on putting out more affordable things, and like the Equinox and Solstice series that we do, I really try to make this something which comes in under 100 quid and delivers on like just a big hit of juicy flavor. Something for summer that I would give you all a little heads up on, which I think is really good, is we're doing a small batch Balblair 15-year-old for our summer Equinox and Solstice bottling, and that's just 2 first fill barrels, 15 years old, 48.5%, and it's real juice, and that's going to be about 90, basically 100 quid a bottle. But I think in this day and age, it's pretty good and decent value.
Just to highlight, so because we're on the other side of the world, so there's a bit of a delay here, but Ian, the Equinox and Solstice, the Mortlock has just come through, and the NAS, which is the cask strength edition of this, essentially, we've got both in stock now.
Yeah, they're very tasty, the Mortlachs. So
yeah, the Mortlock label is just beautiful as well. Like I can't wait to just drink half a bottle. And I agree, the approachability is a lot better with them, which is nice. And I'm looking forward to the Bal Blair. I don't think we've had much Bal Blair in Australia once they stopped bringing in the vintages.
Yeah, it's a funny one. Yeah, but it's one of those whiskies which I think is still really lovely. It's a like proper sort of fruit bomb whiskey, Highland fruit juice. I love it. And this is our first Bal Blair we've bottled, so that's cool as well.
You want me to share
anyone
the
else like
results?
to ask any questions before we wrap things up?
Yeah. Well, I think we'll share the results. It seems pretty overwhelming for the Caroni, which is amazing, and the Enmore coming in a close second. But what we might do is we might just say thank you so much for joining us for this Malternatives tasting. And if Angus, if you've got a little bit more time to spare, we might get some questions. Owen, let other people have a question first.
No, it's all right. I'm all I'd say is, so thank you all very much for attending, and thank you for putting on this tasting. It's really nice to talk about our other spirits that we do. I'm proud that we have put out, I think, a good quality range of not just whiskies, but also Armagnacs, Cognacs, and rums in particular. I'm pleased with our rum selection, so it's nice to see good feedback. And this is as I said, this is the first time I've just done a tasting of our products, which is just rums and French spirits, and I was terrified of encountering real life rum nerds in a situation like this before, and I'm even more scared now. So thank you, Owen, for making my fears reality. It's good to face your fear. I think it's giving me the kick up the arse. I need to go away and actually do some more proper rum research. So thank you for that.
I made you an admin, Angus, so you can mute him anytime.
No, it's all right. I will never learn and change unless I expose myself to this kind of scrutiny. So yeah, and I'm not ashamed to say it. I think it's important to know and just be honest about these things. Like rum is not my first love or my main world, and yeah, I don't know. But I love it, and I want to go away and learn more. So yeah. Would anyone else like to ask